Now let us welcome Dr. Mohan Kancharla for the event. Okay, so welcome Dr. Mohan. So very pleased to see you. The topic is design thinking for strategic innovation. Okay, so before we talk more about design thinking, so let us get a quick introduction about Dr. Mohan. Okay. Dr. Mohan is an accomplished management consultant with over 3 decades of experience in IT and consulting. He had held various leadership roles in TCS, which is one of the leading IT company in India, and of course, it's a more international Tata Consulting Services, and superannuated as a strategy advisor. Okay, he recently, I think, he ended his service there successfully after a very long stretch with TCS. He is author of Consulting a Practitioner's Perspective, Design Thinking in Consulting, and Design Grid, a conceptual framework for design thinking and consulting. So 3 books. Well, that's great to see Dr. Mohan. He is also an invited faculty and keynote speaker in many industry and academic events. A certified management consultant, executive coach, corporate director, and ESG professional, whatnot. He has been recognized by the CEO Today as one of the top 100 global management consultants and received CEO Today Management Consulting Award in 2018. So welcome, Dr. Mohan. We are all eager to listen to you. And the topic is very interesting, design thinking and consulting. Welcome to the board. And please take up. You may do some little more introduction from your side. You are in mute. Huh? You are in mute.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you, Mr. Kadir. I mean, that was a brief and succinct introduction. I mean, I guess that should suffice. So, Deep, if you could help me out with the presentations, please. Do I have control, Deep, or would you be controlling?
Deep will control. Just say next.
Right. Okay. We could go to the next couple of slides, Deep. So the second slide, I think. Next slide, and after that. You could go to the next slide. It didn't shift, Deep. Yeah, we could stay here. Thank you. Right. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and depending upon which part of the world you're signing in this day. Greetings to this global audience, and welcome to the session on design thinking for strategic innovation. So design thinking, it's gaining momentum across industries, primarily due to the emphasis it places upon the human-centered approach for problem solving. And over the next 45 minutes or so, we will explore how design thinking has evolved. What's the definition of design thinking? We look at some of the frameworks of design thinking, and then we'll see how design thinking has been executed in various industries. And towards the end, and most importantly, we'll see how design thinking can be an innovative enabler for strategy execution. And we look at that through a case for digital transformation. And time permitting, I'll take some questions towards the end. Okay. Next slide, Dave. Right. So design thinking has actually been around since the 1950s. Design thinking started in the 50s as a design science as a discipline was introduced by Buckminster Fuller of MIT. He was a serial innovator. And later in 60s, we saw the rise of industrial design or product design in US, and it was also called as participatory design in Europe itself. In the 1970s, when the concept of design thinking was developed by social scientist and Nobel laureate Herbert Simon, and then moving on in the 80s is when Donald Norman, and also a design theorist, introduced the term user-centered design. He essentially reframed the term participatory design as user-centered design. 80s, we saw design thinking as a method for creative action and innovation through the founding of Stanford D School by Ralph Foster from the SAP organization. And that is where design thinking got really popularized in the academic world. And later in 2000s is when David Kelly, who was also the founding director of D School, he started IDEO, which is a pioneering design company, and that is how design thinking was brought into the business world. Next, the okay, next slide, please. Okay. So Tim Brown, who is the CEO of IDEO, provides a very succinct definition. In a much more simpler words, he says that design thinking is thinking as a designer would. I mean, of course, there is the formal definition which is listed here. It says that it's a discipline that uses the designer sensibility and methods. It matches people's needs with what is technically feasible and what is viable business strategy can convert customer value into a market opportunity. So that's the formal definition of design thinking. Next slide, there. Okay. Now in the previous one, okay, this is taken from Philip Kotler's Human to Human Marketing, and where he emphasizes on design thinking also as a means of strategic innovation, and we're looking at the innovation trifecta here. So if you look at this graphic here, design thinking, innovation or design thinking, it really operates at the intersection of the user desirability. Here we are talking about the our customers' unmet needs, and then the technical feasibility for a given unmet need. What is the problem and how do I solve it, and is that technically feasible in the first place? And the third dimension is that once I find a technically feasible solution, is it viable from a business standpoint, kind of a thing. So that intersection is where design thinking operates for towards strategic innovation, kind of thing. Now, in order to provide innovative solutions for human problems, design thinking offers a framework. It shifts the story from what can I do next to where can my users get the most help, kind of a thing, right? So here we see Stanford D School's design thinking framework. This is, like I said, it was all pioneered in the Stanford D School, and it's one of the first and the most popular framework for design thinking. And it goes through the 5 different phases. It starts with empathizing. Empathizing is all about understanding whom we are designing for and what is it that is important to them. In the define phase, you summarize the outcomes from the empathy stage into meaningful user requirements. And then you go about exploring various solution options and generating as many ideas as possible. This is another key concept of design thinking, the whole concept of ideation. It's just that you explore as many solutions as possible and without shooting down any particular idea. If an idea doesn't fit, you park it and you move forward, but every idea is allowed to be tabled, and it's to taken forward for a debate. Once the ideation phase is concerned, another key concept of design thinking is to fail fast or creating prototypes, kind of a thing. So you bring the solution as close to the user as possible, you try it out before you actually take it to the marketplace for the final testing place. What you also see in this graphic here is that there are various feedback loops from every stage backwards, and that is equally important in design thinking. Even at the testing phase after the product is launched, if for any reason you found that there is some problem, there is no harm in going back to the drawing board and starting all over again, kind of. So with this basic understanding of the design thinking concepts, now let's see how design thinking has been executed in various industries. Next 2 slides. Next, please. Right. So if I look at design thinking in the banking industry, so this is an example of a Norwegian bank where where they wanted to create a savings accounts for millennials, kind of a thing, right? So it was all about, in conventionally what happens is that you have an account for an adults, and if you are wanted to create a savings account for millennials, all we do is to reconfigure the savings account, which means that, okay, instead of withdrawal limit of let's say 100 euros, I make it 10 euros, or instead of a checkbook with 50 leaves, I make it 20 leaves. So what you're trying to do is that you're only reconfiguring whatever the features of the existing savings account is. What design thinking recommends is that it recommends a human-centered approach, and we should reach out to the end customer and empathize with their own persona. So while we were working on this engagement, after the debrief, we were actually going out to colleges, for malls and sports fields, etc., to talk to different youngsters and understand what is it that they would require in a banking account, kind of thing. Now, this was in the early 2000 time frame where internet banking was just about rising. We're not talking about mobile banking. and their requirements at that point was more around a seamless internet banking where you can move from transaction to transaction or a device to device, and that is what they were all looking at that particular point of time. In the next slide, we look at how design thinking has been applied in the insurance sector. So this is an illustration of an auto insurance company where we were trying to determine how does the auto insurance company define the premiums for insurance kind of thing. So in a many a time, the insurance of your car is a function of the cost of the asset kind of a thing. So the more expensive the car, the more premium you would pay, kind of thing, right? Now, what design thinking advocated in this stage is to be open to radical collaboration and to learn from the cross-industry best practices. Right? So this is a point of a time where the mobile communications were becoming very rampant, and they introduced the pay-as-you-go model. And what the insurance company did at this point is that, can I look at this pay-as-you-go model kind of a thing, right? So the reasoning is that because the when do you claim an insurance? You claim an insurance either if there's a breakdown or if there's an accident, and that cannot happen in the garage, it happens on the road. So their thinking is that which is a car that is most used on the road and therefore more prone to an accident or a breakdown, or and therefore and giving rise to an insurance or a premium claim kind of a thing. So I mean, if I work out of Chennai in India, and probably for my daily office use, which is probably far off, I might use my a compact car to go to work on a daily basis because it's just me driving up and down. But over the weekend, if I want to take my family out, or if you go golfing or with friends, etc., you might use the a bigger vehicle or an SUV to go for these long drives kind of a thing. I mean, effectively, which is a car that is more on the road? It is the smaller car, which is probably priceless, but the usage is more. So therefore, the whole concept was changed from premium price pricing, not based upon the price of asset, but shifting that to charging premiums based upon the price usage of the particular asset or the car. In the next slide, we will look at how design thinking has been applied in the retail or the FMCG sector. This is a case of Procter and Gamble's Oral-B. Now, Oral-B, when they were introducing a toothbrush for infants, again a similar example situation like that of the banking example that we looked at a few minutes back, is that the initial design was all about resizing the adult toothbrush. So, for example, if an adult toothbrush it's got 1 inch of bristles and 6 inches of stem or a handle that is there, they said, okay, why don't we just make it, since it's for infants, we'll make it 1/2 inch of bristles and maybe 3 inches of 3 inches of a stem or a stalk. But that kind of failed very miserably, and then applying the principles of observing the end user experience. So some of the executives went and started to look at how youngsters, the infants, are actually brushing, 5 year olds or 7 year olds, or 5 year olds are brushing their teeth. As adults, we use the fingers for holding the brush and we can brush on it. But for infants, if you notice them, they do not use the fingers. They'll be using the wrist to get a grasp of the toothbrush itself. I mean, the reason being their hand motor skills are not yet so developed, kind of thing. And now, if you have, if an infant is holding the brush with his full wrist, the brush was slipping off, the paste was falling all over the floor, etc., kind of a thing. So the real trick here is that then they started to prototype it, and to the change that they made is to make sure that the stem or stalk or the handle is much more thicker, which will allow the infants to hold the toothbrush better, and therefore they can brush properly, kind of a thing. So this you could observe it by applying the principles of design thinking, which is from prototyping, testing, and improvising that whole scenario kind of a thing. A similar example which was tried out by Rubbermaid is that when you look at the vegetable peelers, the original vegetable peelers were thin and were steel all through, kind of a steel peeler with a steel handle, etc. But that becomes very slippery for senior citizens or elderly people with arthritis, etc. So therefore, Rubbermaid then changed that the whole vegetable peeler into a very thick rubber handle, and that made it easier for all these other people also to use it. In travel and hospitality industries, if you look at the airline industry, and if they wanted to provide value-added services for their preferred customers, what typically happens is that the airlines, be it Jet or Indigo, however, I mean, they're looking at improvising the existing services. So you have a separate counter for business class, you have a launch for the business class, and probably in the Western world, even the security check-in counters are also separate for business class passengers kind of thing. But and there's a bigger seat and better service within the aircraft carrier also. But all of that is happening is just an extension of whatever service that you're providing. What design thinking advocates is that how do I integrate services from the adjacent industries? Can I look at the journey map of my customers and how can I see enhance that particular value? And this is what more than the airline industries, the likes of Make My Trip and Go Ivibo, etc., did. So they take care of your airline booking, they take care of your road transport, they also take care of your travel, hotel stay, etc., kind of a thing. So they ensured that they're providing you a seamless service across industry sectors kind of a thing, and they were really providing a value proposition across the ecosystem, right? In the next slide, we look at how design thinking has been applied in the life sciences and the healthcare. Like this probably is the one of the best illustration of how design thinking can be applied. This is from GE Healthcare, and there are some beautiful YouTube videos. I strongly recommend you watch these videos to really understand how design thinking, changed this whole situation or the problem that they were working on. So Doug Dietz, who was the engineer and for the MRI scanners, one of his first installations was at a pediatric hospital. So he's mightily excited, and he goes there, he does his work, and he's waiting to visualize the experience of one of the first patients or the customers kind of thing. And but to his dismay, what he found that when the parents were bringing the child, there was a lot of anxiety in the parents, the child, and it is a very traumatic experience for him to even observe it, like, right now. And then he goes, he heard about the Stanford design school. He goes there, he learns about design thinking, and he comes back and redesigns the whole experience itself, kind of a thing. Now, if you see, then if you've experienced, if you've gone through an MRI experience, what typically happens is that it's a very claustrophobic environment, and there is very noisy. You have to lay still, and then the X-ray tables turn around you at very close, just about 5-6 inches above your face, and it is very traumatic even for adults, kind of a thing. So what Doug then does is that he goes and talks to young parents of young children. He goes and talks to daycare center executives. He goes talks to pediatric doctors, the library associates, and so many of them, and tries to understand, and he converts the whole experience into an adventure itself, kind of, right? So what he did is that in most of these MRI rooms there is a long corridor, and after the corridor is where the actual room is, where the MRI machine is, right? So the whole entire corridor is painted in some form of an adventure, either a jungle or an underwater or a space odyssey. And accordingly, the technicians, the parents, the child, all of them are given costumes that they can wear through. But there's a lot of fun and play that happens, and they're led to the actual MRI room itself. And then after a point, that's when the technician then says that, okay, this is where we need to be very silent. Probably the cops are coming now, and here is a good hideout place. There might be lots of whistles and drums, but you need to be laying still, etc., kind of thing. And in that little bit of a process, when the child is still and not at all moving, the whole MRI is taken off, kind of a thing, and the child comes out. And then Doug goes on to add, saying that the best feedback that he got that day, and it is true for any executive, is that when the child turns around and says, Daddy, can we come back tomorrow? Like, so that's probably the best application of design thinking in across various industries, kind of thing, right? So next two slides, Dick, please. Yeah. Now, design thinking in products, in many of the examples that I spoke about, I mean, that's quite proven, and it is quite easy to understand. Like, if you look at design thinking in services, probably it is evolving. Like we looked at the services in the airline industry and so on and so forth. But then, if I look at design thinking and advisory, now that's probably something that's radical, but it is realizable. Now, and as Steve Jobs says, design is not just how it works, how it looks like and feels, but design is how it works, kind of a thing. So this is where I'm trying to talk about. Let's now experience how design thinking can be leveraged for human-centric advisory itself, kind of thing. And that's how I'll come to how design thinking can be applied for strategic innovation. But before that, just to recap on a few concepts that are there, we first start to look at the next slide there. the design thinking principles itself. Like now, the principles are fundamental rules or proposition that could be true for any particular situation, kind of thing. Now, drawing from the what we have experienced for design thinking in products and services, I've defined 5 design thinking principles, like, right, which are valid for advisory services. Like, first is the human-centered design, which is empathizing with the real end users, embracing ambiguity and diversity. It is all about accepting uncertainty as a reality and radical openness to radical collaboration. It's learning from diverse perspectives and co-creating impactful solutions, is promoting emotional engagements, kind of. The more people participate, the more they get involved, and they feel they get an ownership to be part of the problem as well as a solution, kind of a thing. The last principle is implementing and iteratively improvising, kind of a thing. That's like proactively working upon perceived shortcomings. Like the next slide, the next concept is design thinking practices. Now, practices are the what practices are how you achieve the outcomes of the various principles that we spoke about. There are about 12 design thinking practices that are applicable for advisory services. But to just touch upon a few of them, empathy map is a 2 by 2 matrix which explores what the user is saying, doing, thinking, feeling. It also captures the pains and gains of every individual user's, kind of a thing. In business model canvas, it describes how an organization can generate value for its customers from across various dimensions of the enterprise, be it on costs, revenues, partnerships, suppliers, and vendors, etc., kind of a thing. Morphological analysis, it's a creative problem solving technique. It disaggregates, it systematically structures and breaks down to smaller chunks of problems so that you can explore all possible solutions. Value proposition canvas, which is the last one listed here, it describes how well an organization's products or a services fit the market and how is it able to generate value for your customers. It is actually an extension of the business model canvas. It draws from two of these modules called customer segments and the value proposition. Okay, next slide, Deep. So putting them together, the principles are the what of design thinking, and the practices are the how of design thinking. Now, design grid, what you see in here, are the matrix of these principles and practices. It is my strategic innovation, and it is these. This is what we will apply for strategic innovation. And now we will look at the just one more concept. Next slide. In now, if I look at advisory services before I jump into the digital transformation case study, so what happens is that in advisory services the phases of are not linear. Like, I mean, they're always cyclic. Like, but then nonetheless, most consulting assignments go through a 5 phases, which is you first need to understand the context of the current situation. You do a current state assessment. You look at what the defined target is, what your goals are, and we try to understand the gaps between these two, and it is then wrapped up with a report on the recommendations and the report that is provided, kind of a thing. So this is how the consulting phases go through. And now I'll look at a digital transformation case study. We'll walk through each of these phases and we will see how the design thinking principles and practices can be applied. Now, in this just stay with the previous slide for a moment. In this digital transformation case study, this is an illustration of a typical technology services company which is transforming its internal systems and IT operations, kind of a thing. I mean, the goal here, I mean, they have some amount of in-premises and manual interventions, all that is required. But from that, the goal is to make everything be available in real time. The organization looked at 5 the digital transformation objectives of anytime, anywhere availability of their applications to their associates on any device. Like, so that's the broad mandate or the objective of this particular digital transformation initiative. Like, now, and to develop in the next slide, and to develop a design grid for digital transformation. I mean, this is probably the end state, but just using this as a reference as to the process in which we will go through this is that in developing a design grid, we first we identify a principle. So for understanding context in the case of a digital transformation, what is the most relevant principle that is available? Like, so in this case, it could be a human-centered design. Once you identify a principle, for that particular principle, we try to identify what are the two most related practices for this. So for human-centered design, for in understanding context, for digital transformation. It could be empathy maps and user personas. Like, so this is how I start. Then I go to the next phase of current state, and I repeat the same exercise for all the five phases. Like, right? Next slide, please. Right. So in understanding context, what happens is that in any advisory service, typically we go through the organization documents that are available, some briefing documents. Maybe we might interview some of the C-level executives, and this is also done with what are the standard questionnaires that the consulting would typically have. Like, but what design thinking recommends is that you need to connect with the end customer to understand the real context and the real problem. Like, next slide, the. So in this case, so therefore, with that design thinking objective, the most relevant principle here was found to be a human-centered design, and the relevant practice is a human is an empathy map. Like, so now I talked about the digital transformation case scenario, and within the different users. So if I take the corporate executives, I mean there could be management, there are salespeople, and there are delivery executives. Like, so within them, if I take the management layer, what is it that they need to do? They want to make IT as an efficiency booster. Like, how do they see IT? They see it as a cost center. What are they always saying? Like, you need to reduce IT spend. What do? They use IT for their forecasting, etc., kind of a thing. So this is how an empathy map is built up for the management layer or the corporate executives, and a similar empathy maps is also built up for the delivery executives and also for the sales professionals. So that will, all the three together will allow us to see how each one views, each stakeholder or each persona is viewing the same problem in different ways. So you might be able to find synergies. You would allow the different stakeholders to empathize with each other's problems, and therefore to come up with better solutions. Like, so from understanding context, we move to the next phase of the current state assessment. Like, next slide, please. In current state, typically the information is baseline once again upon all the available documents that is there. But what is happening here is either these documents are dated, or it is always a third person view of the current state. It is not a real time view of the current state itself. Like, so what design thinking recommends is that you need to capture the real data, and you need to understand the story behind the real data itself. And if required, you need to do organizational and some amount of technology assessments before you want to before you want to explore what should be the target state. Like, so in this case, the most principle that we found in the next slide, you see that we've felt that next slide. Yeah, the design thinking principle that we applied here is that openness to radical collaboration. Like, so we want to collaborate with as many stakeholders. We wanted to reach out to the end customer itself and to understand. So if I'm doing an infrastructure advisory, if you're looking at digital transformation, it's not just the CEO or the CSO that needs to be involved, but probably I also need to talk to my infrastructure head, kind of a thing. A case of an e-commerce site, the e-commerce site real strategic goal is in terms of how soon can the next screen appear, kind of a thing. How soon can I take my customer, my buyer, prospective to a payment option. Like, so which means that the real trick there and the real guidance that you can get to increase speed will come from your infrastructure head, where you can look at the networks and the communications to see how I can deliver this service, kind of a thing. And then we should be bold enough and be open to collaboration with even these executives that are there, and make sure that we understand their point of view also, like that. So which is why the principle chosen here is openness to radical collaboration, and the practice we use is the business model canvas. Like, so in the business model canvas, these are all the 9 different segments that are there, and each one of the segment is populated with different how the organization is at this particular point of time. So in the customer segments could be only development teams and the sales teams, kind of a thing. But going forward, we may want to look at web-based applications, or the channels could change from on-premises to mobile applications, kind of a thing. So that is what they would express their needs and desires going forward, kind of a thing. So with the understanding of the current state, we then move to the target state definition in the next slide. So here again, conventionally, what happens is that your current state, your problems. So what people end up trying to do is that we're trying to find answers for the current problems alone. Like, we don't look at synergies, or how do I get better problems, how do I get exponential solutions, kind of a thing. And if we need to do that, then the design thinking approach recommends that you need to sense a real problem and to respond to that by addressing all stakeholders kind of a thing. You need to ensure that there are divergent stakeholders who can come together to collaboratively define the future state kind of a thing. Like I said, in the case of an e-commerce transformation, it's important to get the to get the infrastructure person also onto the table. Like, so in the next slide, we'll see the principle that we applied here is embracing ambiguity and diversity. Like, so accept uncertainty as a reality kind of a thing. Understand that the problem is really complex, and therefore we need to get a broader solution. We need to bring in diverse stakeholders kind of a thing. And in this case, we use the business model canvas once again as the as a practice here, so that we are able to see that, okay, for a given channel, what was my previous channel, where do I want to go now? Like, so in the same graphic, in the same visual, you will know the current, and in a similar way, you'll be able to understand the target also. So therefore, it might be easier for you to define the gaps and to take it forward, kind of a thing. Another example is that in terms of the key stakeholders, since you're going towards a digital transformation, we are no longer looking at people like programmers or analysts kind of a thing. Probably you see a new breed of people coming up, which are good. It could be, digital champions or digital evangelists kind of a thing. So these are the things that will start to change in your target state. Like, having defined the target, we move to the next phase, which is the analysis and the finding stage. And here again, like we said earlier, the conventionally it's all about finding point solutions kind of a thing. So there is a gap. What is my best way to bridge the gap kind of a thing? But what design thinking recommends is that you need to acknowledge that there is ambiguity, you embrace diversity, and you encourage co-creating of solutions kind of a thing. So you try to analyze possibilities for scale, and you find synergies in the solutions. Like, and to do that, the principle that we found, which is in the next slide, is the principle here is that co-creating impactful solutions, and the practice is morphological analysis. So in our digital transformation scenario, for the stakeholders, like I said, there's either management, sales, and delivery. So we try to draw up a morphological analysis for each of those different stakeholders. And if we look at the customer segments, for from a sales point of view, you look at, we want to bring in a CRM system kind of a thing. It's semi-automated. I don't have applications on the go, and I just need, and there's no wireless availability. So I'm not able to address my customers' problems on a 24/7 basis kind of a thing. So this gives out the different perspectives of what can happen through analysis, in the analysis and findings, by applying design thinking. In the last phase, in reporting and recommendations, in the next slide, what you see is that, you know typically all engagements end with a consulting report. And this, all the report talks about is a set of recommendations. And in most likely it will be a separate project kind of a thing. It's not done together, and there could be a lead time, there could be a gap between the consulting and the implementation part of it. But what design thinking recommends is that, firstly, we need to make sure that all our recommendations are human centered. And what we could also do is that there is executive buy in through storytelling, the rationale itself. So even in advisory services, we do what we call as a conference room pilots, different role enacting, and that we can see how the new solution could fit together, and can it really solve the existing problems. And to do that, the relevant principles here. I'm sorry. Yeah. Next slide, please. The relevant principle is once again the human-centered design. And here we would be using the practice of value proposition canvas. And like I said, value proposition canvas draws from two of the building blocks from the business model canvas. On the right side, you have the customer segments, and on the left is the value proposition. From the empathy map, we got an understanding of each of the pains and gains of user personas kind of a thing, and their problems, the way they see it. Like, so what this value proposition canvas allows us to do is that, have I been able to find pain relievers kind of a thing? If there is a pain, if I can't take it out completely, can I create some intermediate solution where the pain can be relieved at least kind of a thing? Have I been able to create gain creators kind of a thing? So that becomes my true value proposition. And this, in this particular case, we talked about, maybe by creating new channels kind of a thing, by creating new digital champions, and making applications available on the mobile itself, you are therefore able to get onto the anytime, anywhere availability of all your applications to all your associates on any device kind of a thing. So next slide, please. Okay. So in summary, the value proposition for human-centric advice, it lies in empathizing, for which means that the focus should be on the end customer and need not be necessarily on the executive that you're interacting with, but it could be any of the customers that are there, and that customer should have to take center stage. You need to ideate on delving into the real problem and ideate on diverse viewpoints to sense and respond to the unmet needs of all your customers, kind of a thing. And lastly, we need to collaboratively co-create solutions. We need to prototype to fail fast, and so that and improvising with every iteration, kind of thing. And through the case study, we have seen that design grid, it's a true enabler for strategic execution, and design thinking therefore can be a force multiplier for strategic innovation. Thank you. Can go to the last slide, Deep. I'm done with the presentation. Happy to take any questions either on the chat or if anybody would like to ask a question. Uh, Mr. Kadir also, it's time for Q&A.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Mohan. It's fantastic session. So now, what's the best way? For example, a mid-size organization or a smaller organization or a larger organization who don't have enough experience in the methodology of design thinking. Okay, so usually people are familiar with their industry things, but this is something which is very, very important. So what do you advise for, especially, let us take one by one. Let us take a mid-size organization. How can we implement design thinking in that? Is that like you do something, a session for the senior leaders, or you want some reading for them, or you want to do a prototype practice, or what is it you would like
Right.
to recommend?
Right. So, Abdul, typically what happens is that let's take two scenarios. One is, I mean, especially given that you're talking about the in a strategy summit here, when we go through the business planning exercises, for example, I mean, typically if you take an April to March financial year, most organizations are shaping up their business plans in the fourth quarter, around January, February timeframe, and finalizing that around a March timeframe, kind of a thing. So either that, or another scenario could be once your annual report is available and your results are declared, you could also look at a time around the April May timeframe, kind of, right? So when organizations and executives are going through these strategic planning exercises, it could be a strategy plan for the 5-year window that they might be doing at times, or it could be a simple business plan for the next year. Now, these are times when one executives can really use design thinking as a vehicle, as a means to go through their brainstorming sessions. And the best way to do that is that typically what I do is that we conduct design thinking workshops, and it has to be collaboratively done. And what I also recommend to most organizations is that ideally, if you can do it at an offsite as part of your planning exercise, where you're away from your day-to-day work and get some full time that you can really think and strategize, that could be a good point of a time. Maybe around a 2-day workshop, what we go through each of those phases. We look at how we have performed in the past days. Have any of my stakeholders changed, or am I entering into new markets? What the challenges in those new markets are? You can start to create the empathy maps, and the other principle that we spoke about. Ensure that there is a good representation of the C-level executives, the mid-level, and also people who are on the field. If you take a FMCG company, the field executives is where they will get the most inputs from. So ensure that there is a cross-functional team that is available, and everybody comes to the table as equals, and we brainstorm on each phase, and we can go through those ideation exercises and build out this particular plan. What this does is that, I mean, you're still doing a similar brainstorming exercise, but what design thinking does is that it gives a better structure to it. And some of the principles of learning from other industries, collaborating, building upon ideas, these are some of the new things that design thinking will kind of extend your current brainstorming or your thought process to build up solutions. And through that, you might get some 7 or 8 different ideas, and those ideas are then taken forward with detail with the respective teams to some pilot projects about anywhere from 3 to 6 months to see whether it can work or not, kind of thing. So that's a good way where small and medium enterprises can leverage upon. Another opportunity, a good opportunity for applying design thinking is on a product development or innovation, kind of. thing. So whenever they are looking at launching new products or venturing into new markets kind of a thing, I mean, this could be in the middle of the year. It could be one department which is trying to do this particular exercise within their department before they put up a business case to management, for example. At that point of a time, also they can go through a similar exercise, do some prototypes, get some people, and so on and so forth, and to take it forward, kind of a thing. So both these scenarios are quite relevant. And what we've also seen is that once it happens, it is actually design actually can become contagious. I mean, the way it scales is by building a culture of design thinking, kind of a thing.
Some
So
sort
once
of
it happens
culture.
to the corporate, it gets taken forward, and it's actually playing a role in the boardrooms also these days.
Yeah. So, as you rightly said, if you have any new product or service development in place, of course, the design thinking fantastically fits into that. Now, we talk about strategy management as a process. Okay. So, where you do strategy analysis, strategy formulation part, strategy execution. There is a lot of innovation in this process because well, no single framework or methodology fit for every organization because
Right.
each company has its own strengths and weaknesses. So they can
Absolutely.
absorb those process steps very easily if it is their strength, and they cannot do a simple process if it is not their strength. Okay, so here the methodology, whatever is a balance scorecard or is it a OKR, whatever you call it, okay, so
Right.
that has to be adopted for the individual organization. Okay, that's where I think the design thinking comes into picture, where how does this process fits into your particular organization. It does not mean that you eliminate any one of the step of your process. You simplify it and adopt it. Okay,
Right.
instead of just forcing a methodology you must follow, instead of doing that, you just try to adopt for your particular organization with an objective of making your strategy successful. Is that
Right.
something? Mhm.
Absolutely. And like when we talk about the strategy formulation, many a time we do that. You formulate your strategy at the beginning of the year, and we revisit that only towards the end of the year when things have really gone wrong, for example, kind of thing. And what design thinking advocates is that failing fast, creating that feedback loop, for example, and trying to look at data and how you can make your organization more agile and your operating model also, which is intelligent, kind of a thing. Using data, how you can change it, like and so that whole concept of fail fast and the feedback loops is again a key component of design thinking. Like I mean, recently in COVID, for example, I mean, we were able to leverage the power of data itself. I mean, as we knew where the hotspots were, and accordingly we were able to make some changes. Because through that changes, you are able to change the behavior of the people, and therefore make sure that it didn't get spread. And there could be other instances of leveraging data, kind of a thing. Yeah. So design thinking doesn't. It's not a magic silver bullet or magic bullet that creates something. Whatever you're doing currently with any framework or any strategies you've adopted, it gives you a couple of ways of additionally think and build upon it further, kind of a thing. An alternative thought process to your strategy.
That's great. That's great. Now we had one session a while ago about the culture and change. Now I think the design thinking is actually some sort of culture. Okay, so once we used to design thinking approach, embedding design thinking in everything what we do, so we talk more objectively. So we take more about solution oriented instead of problem oriented. Okay, that's a great thing, Dr. Mohan. Any final points to the audience? Okay, so participants, any question? Manish ji has like
Nice one,
thrown some
Manish.
some lighter stuff.
Right. No,
Okay.
we should probably we should do that. We should put it on as post, kind of a thing. No, I mean, I personally, when I went through an MR exercise, and I can really empathize with it. It's such a very traumatic experience, kind of a thing, and it's very difficult even for adults, kind of a thing. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
And it's not just in
fantastic.
the Abdul. We've now been applying design thing. I mean, I didn't use those illustrations here, but we have cases of design thinking where it's applied in CSR activities, kind of a thing. I'm taking
Mhm.
design thinking into how it can be applied in the ESG context, also from the SDG goals that are available. So you can actually apply SDG design thinking on any particular SDG goals or the indicators
Mhm.
and the targets that they have, and to see how we would work out. Because and that's probably the more recent research that I'm doing, is that so all that I spoke about is we shifted the emphasis from product, and we introduced people also into it. And now human-centered design now is becoming what we call as a humanity-centered design, and by
Mhm.
adding planet component also to it, kind of a thing. So it can be applied across industries. It's got a great potential to be applied in the education sector and the alternative energy and so on and so forth. Like it's
Perfect.
absolutely.
Perfect, Dr. Mohan. Maybe we can have one more session on a particular area where we can apply, like product or maybe a service or maybe any other people
Right.
performance. So we will see. We'll find one more slot for you. Somewhere you can give us more knowledge and share
Right.
your experiences, and
Right.
maybe it's a training for us.
Happy
Thank
to
you.
do.
Thank you.
Like I said, it's a 2-day session that is there where we can collectively brainstorm and build solutions.
Fantastic. Thank you,
Thanks.
Dr. Mohan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, right.
And
Thanks for the opportunity,
if
Abdul.
you have
And
any final thoughts, you can share it.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Best wishes, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.